Hi guys, it's Dr. Tori McJunkin. I hope you guys are doing well and having a great week. We are going to talk about the anti-inflammatory lifestyle. Last time, if you remember, and I think that was a really interesting review last time, but last time, if you looked, we talked about inflammation as being the number one kind of root cause for disease states. And so those could be all sorts of diseases, and we even think things like cancer, chronic diseases, but specifically we talked about overactive bladder. And so what we think is happening is overactive bladder is a chronic inflammatory condition. And long term, those nerves that go between your bladder and your brain, those get inflamed or damaged. And also the bladder wall itself and the receptors on the bladder, those things get damaged as well. And we looked at some of the causes for that inflammation and damage. And we said this is really just too big of a topic to just narrow it all down into one talk. And so today we're going to talk about the anti-inflammatory lifestyle. I think you guys are really going to enjoy this talk. So we're going to cover several different things. I think one of the first things is, how do people know if they have inflammation in their body? And one of the things that I'll tell you is there's not really great lab tests for this. So historically we've looked at something called C-reactive protein, but it's actually not a great marker. It's the best thing we have. There's something that's even worse than that, that's called SED rate, or ESR, and it looks at some kind of inflammatory conditions and also some autoimmune conditions. But there really isn't a wonderful marker. There's a few different companies that are developing what they think to be better chronic inflammatory markers, and so those I'm sure will come out in the next few years. But we also looked at inflammation and how that affects every organ system in your body. So that affects your cardiovascular system, musculoskeletal system, reproductive, your immune system, how that affects even things like cancer, neurological diseases, respiratory diseases, metabolic syndrome, we talked quite a bit about, autoimmune conditions, and then we specifically focused on overactive bladder. So when inflammation becomes chronic, here's some things that you might experience: fatigue, weight gain, or specifically we talked about fat or visceral fat gain, brain fog, you're just not thinking quite as clearly, joint pain, and then for us in this group, it's more overactive bladder. And so the symptoms of that: urgency, urge incontinence, nocturia, waking up and frequently going at nighttime. We also spoke about how inflammation in the body leads to what we call metabolic syndrome. And that eventually can lead to the 4 horsemen of chronic disease. And those are the things that all of us would like to avoid. But those include heart disease, the number one killer, Alzheimer's, one of the scariest things, or other sorts of dementia, diabetes, or type 2 diabetes specifically, and then cancer. And so those are the 4 horsemen of chronic disease. All of them relate to metabolic syndrome, and all of them relate to chronic inflammation. So one of the things that we'll say is inflammation in your body, if it's acute inflammation, is not really a bad thing. So if you get a burn on your hand when you're cooking, we want there to be some inflammation because it increases blood flow, and that promotes healing. Same thing if you sprain your ankle, we want there to be some degree of inflammation because it actually promotes healing, a healing response. But what is not good is chronic inflammation. And that's where this inflammatory cascade just gets turned on, and it keeps going and going and going, and becomes this kind of vicious cycle. So here I'm going to talk about basically 3 different things that we can all do, and I am right there with you guys, but that we can all do to decrease chronic inflammation in our bodies. And I would say for most of us, chronic inflammation probably starts maybe in our 30s and gets more in our 40s and more in our 50s and so on and so forth. But usually our body as a system is working so well in our 20s that we really don't have a lot of inflammation. Now there obviously are exceptions to that rule, and I think problems in the environment, lifestyle, our diet are actually becoming much, much worse than even when I was a kid and when a lot of you guys were kids as well. So here's how. So number one, we want to repair the gut, repair our gut health. And so gut health is becoming incredibly important for almost every kind of disease. There's a lot of research on gut health and neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, gut health on things even like overactive bladder, certainly gut health on diabetes, on cancer. It goes on and on and on. And so remember, we spoke about this briefly last time, but for every one cell of me, there are 2 cells of bacteria. And same for you. So we're more bacteria than we are human cells. And so one of the things that we want to do is we want to foster a really good bacteria. So if we are kind of coexisting with these bacteria and they're like friendly for us, we want it to be good. We want those to be good bacteria because those actually help to shape who we are. And so that's one of the big discoveries I feel like we've made in the last 25 years, but repairing gut health. So what worsens gut health? Well, modern diets and lifestyles weaken the barriers in your gut. And then we've all heard of the term leaky gut. That's become pretty popular. But when you have leaky gut, essentially what happens is toxins that are in foods, that are in liquids, bacteria, all of those things can start going through the gut barrier. Usually those gut cells have a really nice barrier and they're preventing those things from going through. But toxins, bacteria, and then undigested food. And so we begin to see a lot of conditions that are like autoimmunes, irritable bowel, all those sorts of things. And then long term it affects other things, other organ systems like we mentioned. Cardiovascular, our bladder, our pancreas, which would lead to diabetes. Certainly all different kinds of cancers, really well known. And it goes on and on. So that basically when those toxins, bacteria, and undigested food go through that leaky gut barrier, it triggers an inflammatory response. And so that can start the cascade for chronic inflammation in our body. So the question is, what do we do to heal our leaky guts or to repair our gut? And I will say, I don't think this is a one and done thing. I think this is an ongoing thing that needs to be done. So number one, eat fermented foods. And so actually I've been really focusing on this past year. And so kefir, I don't know if you guys know what that is, but essentially it's almost like a version of spoiled milk, but it has grains inside. I've been making my own kefir at home. It's real easy to do. You can order the grains on Amazon and you pour in a little bit of milk in there and it kind of ferments that milk. It actually eats up a lot of the sugar that's in milk and the lactose. So a lot of people are lactose intolerant. It eats up a lot of that. And then you pour it into another glass and then you have your fermented kefir, and that goes in the fridge, and then each day you'll have some of the kefir. And so you can have it with smoothies, with shakes, or you can drink it plain or raw. That is supposed to be the queen of fermented foods. It's one of the best fermented foods you can eat, but obviously even grocery stores you can buy kefir. I think when you make it yourself, there's about 60 different strains of bacteria that are healthy bacteria. When you buy it from the grocery store, you get about 7 strains. Other fermented foods, all of us know about yogurt. And then there are also pickled foods. So pickles themselves, I've been trying to eat pickled onions, red onions, pickles themselves, pickled jalapeno peppers. So some of those things. So with every, I would say, dinner that you're having specifically, or every meal that you're having, try and put some fermented foods in there. Number 2, eliminate most grains. So most grains today are not the grains that our ancestors ate, and they end up being inflammatory in our bodies. Number 3, and we talked specifically last time about a low carbohydrate or ketogenic diet. Remember, carbohydrates are sugar. Our body can run on sugar or can run on ketones. Probably all of our ancestors ate mostly meat when they had it, and they ate very few fruits because they didn't have those a lot. They ate vegetables as much as they had, and they ate grains when they had those as well, but it wasn't a year-long thing. So eliminating most grains. 3, eat a protein-focused diet. So that's eggs, meat, fish, any kind of protein. I think we all need more protein, and one of the big things they found is people's muscle density is really important the older we get. That's one of the best predictors of how healthy you're going to be, how long you're going to live, and your quality of life is how much muscle tone you have. So we'll get to that and one of the other things, but protein really helps in that regard. That's the building blocks for muscle. 4, eat colorful fruits and vegetables as a side. So those shouldn't be your main meal, but those should go along. And so we know that those have all sorts of good anti-inflammatory things. I'm trying to eat those colorful fruits and vegetables that are fermented. But you can figure out what is right for your body. 5, avoid antibiotics when possible, and especially long-term antibiotics. And the reason is those destroy all the healthy gut bacteria and some of the other bacteria that the antibiotics are trying to get rid of. So if you have to take an antibiotic, like the procedure that we do, on the implant procedure, we have you on antibiotics for a few days. It's important to kind of restore your natural bacteria during that time. So yogurt, kefir, fermented foods, we want you to take those things because we want to restore those bacteria. 6, this is a huge one, limit seed oils and processed foods. I mentioned a research study that was a Japanese study last time. It looked at seed oils, and it looked at the one difference for the Japanese people is they started using seed oils and they hadn't used them before, and obesity more than doubled. And so seed oils, what we think happens there is those kill off the energy producing mitochondria that we have in our body. And if you don't have energy, your body can't heal itself. So really try and limit all seed oils, and then processed foods goes along with that. The more raw, organic, natural foods we can eat, the better. And if you can't afford organic food, which can be quite expensive, just try and eat as much raw 1 or 2 ingredient food. Milk, eggs, cheese, like simple things, salmon, those things are kind of 1 ingredient foods. The more stuff that's prepackaged, the less healthy it becomes for you. Number 7, drink bone broth on an empty stomach. And so that's something I haven't done a whole lot of. I actually have some bone broth and I need to work on that. But that's something else that's supposed to be extremely healthy at not only repairing your gut, but improving your gut. And you might be asking, okay, all this talk about my gut, how does this affect my bladder? Well, your gut has a biome. Your bladder actually has a biome. We used to think that the bladder itself was in an environment where there was no natural flora or bacteria. That's not true. Now we know that there's a urobiome, that there is a biome inside your bladder. This all promotes health throughout your body, but also in your bladder. And we know ultimately bacterial health, the right bacteria, make the person healthy. There's been a lot of studies looking at if we change bacterial health, we can give people diabetes, we can give people cancer, we can give people all sorts of conditions, a lot of research on this kind of stuff. Okay, so that first big one is bacterial health or repair your gut. 2, exercise smarter or daily movements. So one of the things that our Western lifestyle has is sitting all day causes chronic inflammation. So most of us now, sit, even at work, we're working at a computer. You want to, if you're retired and sitting at home, we want you to get out of the house, get out in the sun, go for a walk, have an animal, walk your dog, all those sorts of things. Try and go out with friends. But exercise or daily movement is so important for people, and that's something I've focused on the last few years. But but I think you guys, I'd love to hear your story and how those things benefited you. So daily movement. The other thing is we talked about muscles just a little bit, but muscle is so important for you. So I would say either lifting some weights, doesn't have to be heavy weights, or even things like bands, band exercises. You should try and do that a couple times a week. And so there's a lot of evidence now that muscle work is just as important or more important maybe than aerobic therapy, which they used to preach a lot, 10 or 15 years ago. But you want to have muscles because, God forbid, if you fall, we want to be strong enough to get up off the ground. That's really important as all of us age. And then the third thing is play as often as possible or do something that you enjoy. So whether that's golfing, walking the dog, going out with friends, but find some kind of activity where it's something you like, nature walks, something you like, but is something that's kind of active. And just incorporate that into your lifestyle, because some people, the idea of working out is just a terrible thought to a lot of people, and I used to be like that. So just try and find something that you think, I would enjoy that, taking my dog for a walk, going to the park, seeing some friends and walking around, and find something you can incorporate into your lifestyle. Okay, the last one is fixing your sleep. And I know on another live we talked about sleep, and sleep really ties hand in hand in with stress. So the more that we can improve our sleep, the lower our stress is going to be, or the lower our cortisol levels are going to be. So if your cortisol levels are high, if you're always in a stressful state, your body's always going to have that inflammation that's from maybe more emotional states, or the other things we've been talking about, kind of body states. So what we want to do is we want to eliminate the cause. So if a certain relationship is really making you stressed and anxious all the time, you might try and figure out how to limit that, or try and have that relationship on your terms. Maybe reframe your thinking about certain things. And so one of the things that's been beneficial for me is, I am not in control. I can do what I can do, but ultimately other people make their own decisions. I'm going to try and help my children make really good decisions, but really they're in charge of their lives. And so reframe your thinking, and then manage your response. Instead of freaking out on things and getting upset and angry, even on simple things like my husband took the wrong directions, or my kids did this, or my wife did that. Maybe try and manage your response where you kind of tone that down just a little bit. Okay, and then sleep specifically. How to sleep better. Daily movements, we already talked about that. Generally, those want to be a little further away from bedtime. No caffeine after noon. Caffeine, we already know that might be a bladder irritant. You can do things like practice slow breathing beforehand, or box breathing before you go to sleep, and just try and calm your whole nervous system down. Avoid naps after 2:30 p.m. So we want to try and get to bed at a reasonable hour and wake up at a reasonable hour, and try and do that consistently. That sets your body in rhythm. Block blue lights before bed. My wife used to tell me about this like 10 years ago, and I thought she was nuts. And of course, my wife was right, like she is probably most of the time. But the blue lights that we get from phones, from screens, from TV, those actually are sending a signal through your retina to your brain. Hey, it's time to wake up. It's daytime. And so we're always sending that signal, but that's not the signal you want to send. And so you may, think about limiting the use of those, including overhead lights. Start to dim those. You want your house to kind of reflect what it looks like outside. So if it's starting to get dark outside, make your house darker. Wake up and sleep at the same time. I kind of mentioned that. And then I like this one, create a sleep cave. So you want your sleep cave to be silent, dark, and cold. So we sleep better in cold environment. In a dark environment, you want to try and, get every little light crack that's coming in, try and block them all off, and then try and get it as quiet as possible. So that's going to cover all of what we've talked about today, but they really are the 3 steps I say simple, but a lot of those are maybe more complex than simple, to reverse chronic inflammation. Why do we want to reverse it? Chronic inflammation is what's causing our overactive bladder. It's what's damaging our nerves. It's what's causing every disease state, every bit of uncomfortableness that you have in your body is coming from chronic inflammation. So it should be each of our missions that we're going to try and decrease the chronic inflammation in our lives. So we talked about 3 big things we can do. Repair the gut. 2 is move around daily. And 3 is we got to sleep better and manage those stressors in our life. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Again, I'm Dr. Mick Junkin. I'm with Bladder Centers of America. I get to help people with overactive bladder. We use the best technology that's ever been researched, that's been studied, and it has a 93% long-term success rate. It helps 93% of people to overcome urge incontinence, frequency, nighttime urination. It's the best thing that I've seen in medicine, and I've been practicing almost 20 years now. I hope you guys are well. Please let me know in your comments what you're doing to tackle inflammation in your body. God bless you guys, and thank you guys so much. Bye-bye.